Hi, and welcome to my channel, Laura's Library Card. So today I'm here to discuss the 3 audiobooks that I read for Nonfiction November. So the first title that I finished that was a nonfiction title in November was We Are Displaced. This is by Malala Yousafzai, and I listened to this on audio, and this is a collection of stories and tellings about displacement by both Malala, her own story, as well as a number of other young women, young girls, and it was very interesting because I knew who Malala was and some of like her works, but this was a number of collections of stories. Pretty much everyone has been displaced because of politics, war, and violence, which are kind of all the same thing in a lot of those cases. And a lot of the stories were very heart wrenching, and I thought it was very interesting. There was also a lot of good quotes in here. I will put, one of my favorites right here up on the screen. Um, and some of these are stories about the actual like sort of journey or act of being displaced and changing location from point A to point B. A number of these are sort of what the person is doing now, sort of the new situation they find themselves in. And to me, this was really, it really helped point out to me and made me kind of acknowledge my own privilege for not having to deal with these changes in my life that some of these other people obviously have had to deal with. And I found that to be sort of humbling. And also, what was interesting to me was sort of a sense of patriotism that a lot of these people were, young women were explaining, that they missed not only their way of life and their friends and their, their home and the familiarity, but they were literally missing like their like country land and their hometown as it had been before there was violence and before they had been displaced. And sometimes it came down to the people and the that normalcy, but also a lot of it was like, well, this location, country X, was my home, and I miss the way that country X was, in my youth, and how it was when things were good. And that, I just don't feel that I personally have very strong sense of patriotism for like where I live, and I could very strongly like sympathize with the loss of family and friends and the routine in school, but to I just found that element of like wanting to like yearn for a country and a culture, like I found that to be very interesting because I don't know, I just don't feel that I have a very strong like sense of patriotism personally. So this was an interesting collection. I think I've said interesting like 5 times. A collection of stories, some of which were hard to read, but I feel like it was important to realize that this is still happening currently. This book is not that old, and that there's a heck of a lot of people across the world in various countries who are all facing these same displacements and are sort of a people of no land. They can't go home, and yet they're not fully accepted where they are currently. So it was kind of eye-opening for me. The second nonfiction title was How Stella Learned to Talk, subtitle The Groundbreaking Story of the World's First Talking Dog, and this is written by Christina Hunger. I think I first heard about this on, well, I'd heard of Stella and seen some of the videos of the talking dog like on TikTok and Instagram, but I think that Noelle from Noelle Seven Pages has said that she was hoping to read this. For me, this book was not for me. I'm not a dog person. I kind of personally find it really annoying when people talk about their pets as if they're like children, and or such a important family member. Like, I just don't personally hold that view that my pet is quite as dear to me as a person. Like, come for me for that, but like, yeah, I don't know. And so I don't think that I was a target audience for this book, and it was, kind of interesting. Christina Hunger is a speech and language pathologist, and to me, that was the most interesting part of this whole like book, was the discussion about the acquisition and development of language, as well as the use of language, as well as the use of the, alternate forms of communication that she has, put in place for Stella, as well as used in her practices for people who need alternate forms of communication. So I thought that, those devices and stuff, that discussion was interesting, and the language, speech and language pathology part was interesting. But for the most part, I didn't really care that much about like Stella's story. Like, I don't know. And there was also this air of like just pretentiousness to like the whole thing that was mostly coming, I think, from Christina. I just felt like, there were a couple times where she veered into talking about minimalism and how that was so great for her mind. She talks about how she just like cold turkey deleted all the social media apps off of her phone and how it just like decluttered her mind. And then later she completely ignores the fact that she starts a blog and starts a TikTok and starts an Instagram and to get Stella's story out there. And she takes on every single news interview that people come to her. And I'm like, okay, cool. And I don't know, there's just multiple times throughout the book where she just gives this like air of like she knows what's best. Like early on, she's talking about this communication device and how, she was able to change her predecessor pathologist's treatment plan and had amazing success because no one believed that she did at the amazing capabilities of this kid and of the communication device and how it would change their life. And I was like, okay, but also it just was written in this air of like, well, thank God that I'm the best, and the world's first talking dog all has to do with me and my amazingness. So I don't know. I didn't really enjoy the actual reading experience. Felt like a lot of the critiques that are on the Goodreads reviews that I was reading was saying that they thought it was actually really amazing that she never consulted any sort of like dog behavior specialists or take any sort of dog training classes, because there was a lot of stuff that she was sort of discovering that like behavioral people who have worked with dogs like have known for a long time. So for me, like, I think that if you have a dog and if you really like dogs and you think that it's super, super interesting to read about how you can like help facilitate dog communication, I think this book might be kind of interesting for you. But for me, it just was like, kind of a struggle to get through, and I didn't really get much out of it, and I was not the target audience. And the third title that I finished for Nonfiction November was Disability Visibility, First Person Stories from the 21st Century. This is edited by Alice Wong and has quite a number of contributors, because this is a collection of stories, collection of essays, collection of pieces from disabled voices, or pretty approximate about disabled people in a couple cases. And this was something I read over the course of like a whole month. I just kind of like dipped in and dipped out. And it's divided into multiple sections about, existing and like being and doing and becoming. I can't remember what the last one was. So yeah, I'm hoping to have a sort of a long discussion about this book if I can get it arranged with one of my friends here on the channel. But this was very interesting. There was a wide variety of essays, and some of them were extremely heart-hitting, and hard-hitting, that were talking about the struggles of just being recognized as a person and the struggles that the world has put in place because of ableist history, and also just like literally the struggles that sometimes people have to go through from people who are not as aware of disabled needs, etc. But then there was also quite a number of more outright FU and also sort of subtle FU, like, hell yeah, I can do anything that you can do. Like, it doesn't matter who I am or the fact that you can't like see my disability. So it was very interesting. There was a number, there was blind and there was deaf representation. There was, chronic illness and pain. There were, people who had developed disabilities over time or later in life, as well as people who'd been born with disabilities. So I felt like there was quite a variety of stories, and that it was an important read, and some of them I got more out of than others. But that's why it kind of took me the whole month to get through it, was because I kept kind of stewing with some of them a little bit longer, and it was very thought-provoking for me, and to kind of see some of the ethical issues that were brought up and discussed by the various writers about like literally having the right to exist in the first place, all the way to the laws as written. And some of that is carried in from grandfathered in over time from a less sensitive time. And also just sort of some of the verbiage that was used throughout the book made me more aware of the verbiage that I'm using in my regular day-to-day life. So I got a lot out of this book, Disability Visibility, and I'm hoping, like I said, to do a discussion about it on my channel. Let me know down in the comments if you'd be interested in such a thing. So yeah, so I do generally like to read nonfiction, not usually 3 in a month, and usually I think I'm kind of prefer more of a narrative nonfiction style. I felt like the We Are Displaced format of stories, as well as Disability Visibility, collection of stories and essays, that's not really my preferred style. I tend to want to get a little bit more out of what I'm reading, slash maybe give myself more time to like think about what I've just read. And so sometimes when it feels like it just goes to like next, especially when I'm just listening on audiobook, I want to pause and kind of reflect a little bit more. So anywho, I felt like I encountered a lot of interesting nonfiction this month in November, and definitely want to continue to keep up nonfiction happening in my life. But I don't know, 3 in 1 month was kind of a lot to some extent. So how did you do in reading any nonfiction in November, if you read any? And if you have any awesome nonfiction recommendations, definitely leave those down in the comments. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks so much for sticking around, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.